Hello and welcome. This is Wilrens for Create a Learning Site, the place to go deeper in your understanding of the Bible. Deconstructing faith. I must admit, when I first encountered the phrase, I was not sure what it meant. What are we talking about? Well, young adults are leaving the church, including evangelical churches, at unprecedented rates, at least in North America and Europe. It's not new that people drop out of church or experience a crisis of faith. However, what is new is the rate at which it's happening, that we have a phrase describing what they do. They are deconstructing faith, and that this is now a self-conscious movement. I won't go into the statistics. You can visit the website of the Barna Group, a Christian research company, best known for its surveys on faith, if you want hard numbers. Or read David Kinnaman's book, 2011, You Lost Me, still relevant. There's also good news, by the way. Barna identifies the teens and young adults of today as the open generation, and they are very interested in Jesus and open to the Bible. But church, not so much. But first, it may seem that all of this is a little bit off topic. Isn't Create a Learning Site all about the Bible? Well, yes, but this includes teaching the Bible, and to do that well, we must take into account our audience, not to mention cultural forces that influence us and our interpretation. Therefore, this topic fits. And there are a few things I'd like to say about it. To begin with, I dislike the word, mainly for two reasons. First, it's a decidedly negative word. It means you break something down or destroy it. I'm aware that in this context, destruction is generally not the intended meaning. The term was inspired by the literary philosophy of Jacques Derrida, a French philosopher who used the term deconstruction in a very special sense. But who understands what Derrida meant? And who thinks of Derrida when they hear deconstructing faith? Words have a life of their own. You cannot control what people hear or understand once you have released your statement. The normal meaning of the word, and the one most likely to be heard, is breaking down, not French philosophy. There are better terms to use. How about re-evaluating, reassessing, reconsidering, rethinking, reimagining, or even reconstructing faith? Second, I dislike the term because it's too broad, covering a wide array of different issues. Some do indeed break down their faith, whether intentionally or not, and turn away. Many experience a crisis of faith at some point or struggle with doubt. Yet others simply go through a process of questioning and reconsidering their own Christian tradition, or even just one dogma or a single idea, such as young earth creationism, hell, or predestination. Should we put all of these into one bag and combine them under the same label, deconstruction? It doesn't look like a helpful category to me. And if a process of reassessing what someone believes is meant, deconstruction is a poor choice of words. Maybe it's time to deconstruct deconstruction. And if we are still going to deconstruct, I think it should be something like racism in the church, the abuse of power in the church, sexual abuse in the church, male dominance and the oppression of women in the church, etc., rather than faith. Things that truly deserve to be broken down. Sometimes Martin Luther, the 16th century reformer, is put forward as a classic example of deconstruction in the more distant past. But this completely misreads Luther. In Luther's existential crisis, he was not doubting faith, he was doubting himself. It was only after this crisis had been resolved that he set out to deconstruct. But he did not deconstruct the Christian faith. he deconstructed the errors of the medieval church. And as he was doing this, he was ablaze with faith, no doubt inside. This has nothing in common with modern-day conceptions of deconstruction. However, let's face it, there is a problem. I started with the large number of young adults leaving the church. That's not happening because a few individuals call for the deconstruction of faith. It's happening because people look at the church or evangelicals and don't like what they see, and they have a point. David Kinnaman of the Barna Group has studied what non-Christians think about Christianity and why young adults are leaving the church. It's not a pretty picture, but we should pay attention. Let me show you a few of the outcomes of these studies. First, as evangelicals, we are mostly known for what we are against, which outsiders, rightly or wrongly, assume to include or we're against gays and gay marriage, science and evolution, women in leadership, or perhaps women in general, and feminism, abortion, initiatives against climate change, or even the claim of climate change itself. Now, I realize there's an element of caricature in this. By no means all evangelicals deny climate change, and even fewer reject science, but too many of us do. And more importantly, it's unclear what we are for. Second, our perceived attitude does not make faith any more attractive. For instance, outsiders see us as hypocritical, overly political, at least in the United States, judgmental, authoritarian, shallow, and unwilling to engage with difficult questions, instead countering with pat answers and punishing those who step out of line or dare to ask more difficult or critical questions. Again, in part this is caricature and stereotype, but far too often it is more than a little true. I'll cover three more outcomes or perceptions, and that's abuse, anger, and aggressive masculinity. Number three, abuse. I think there's not another single factor doing more harm than sexual abuse and attempts to cover it up. And that's not just a Roman Catholic problem. It's no wonder we're seen as hypocritical. 4, anger. In case you think evangelical faith in the public square is marked by qualities like joy, peace, love, think again. Recently, my wife and I were reading a biography together, and at one point, toward the end of his life, the person in question said the wrong thing by conservative evangelical standards. The outburst of anger that followed was hard to believe. Anger by the thousands. As I finished reading the chapter, we looked at each other somewhat stunned. Then she said, "I'm ashamed to be a Christian." Well, that must be the saddest thing I've ever heard her say. Yes, Jesus was sometimes angry. How often? And with whom? Hint, was not with the outsiders. No wonder we're seen as judgmental. And then 5, and last, aggressive masculinity. Oh, here's another sobering read. Jesus and John Wayne. To be sure, the book comes with a bias. It claims on the cover that white evangelicals fractured a nation. Well, usually it takes two parties for fracture to happen. Those white evangelicals are reacting to something. And the book fails to inquire what that something, the other side of the problem, might be. Still, it's a painful and elaborate documentation of how large sections of American evangelicalism have gone wrong. It has embraced an essentially macho ideal of masculinity, epitomized by John Wayne, strong authoritarian leadership, and male headship. Peace and joy in the Holy Spirit? Nah, too tame. Hey, the open generation is very interested in Jesus. Let's not give them John Wayne. Nevertheless, I will continue to identify as an evangelical. There's no way I'm going to give up this word. It's far too beautiful. Think about it. What's at the center of evangelical? It is evangel. That is the gospel. Can we do better than putting the gospel at the center of our lives? Is there a better way to live, or a greater word to describe ourselves? Well, yes, there is. I can think of one, and that is Christian. Because what's at the center of this word? It is Christ. Well, I guess you cannot top that. But evangelical is not far behind. I'm holding on to these words. I'm an evangelical Christian. But how can we respond to those in doubt? In closing, a few suggestions. Listen. You're not expected to fix the problem or offer a solution. Usually, a sympathetic ear is much more helpful. Be ready to say, I don't know, or I'm not certain. Faith is not the absence of doubt, much less certainty on every point of doctrine. Don't give pat or superficial answers. And then encourage them to read Julian of Norwich. What? Why? Because she was a woman, the first woman to write a book in the English language, and because she wrote a long time ago in a different world, yet with a distinct Christian voice. Okay, it does not have to be Julian of Norwich. The point is, we all need Christian voices from outside our little circle. The Christian tradition is rich, deeply rooted in history. No one should reject it based on a narrow version of it. Don't walk away from the faith without looking beyond your own faction. And then, finally, above all, live a congruent life. I picked up this word from Eugene Peterson, The Message, for whom congruence was a lifelong pursuit. Congruence means that what we are on the outside matches what we are on the inside. It means that what we say and what we do accords with who we are. In other words, as evangelical Christians, we do indeed live the evangel and follow Christ. Sounds like a radical idea. And who knows, it might prove more attractive than anger.
The show will be starting in just a few moments. Thank you for your patience. The show will be starting in just a few moments. Thank you for your patience.